In the summer of 1988, the long-standing conflict between traditionalist Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre and the Vatican came to a spectacular conclusion. In open defiance of the Vatican, Archbishop Lefebvre consecrated 4 traditional Catholic bishops. He was immediately excommunicated, and the international press accused him of causing the first schism in the Catholic Church in over 100 years. I'm Julius Smetona. This is what Catholics believe. While the press covered the more sensational aspects of this event, the deeper and more substantial issues were largely ignored. What were these issues? Those who adhere to tradition claim that the Second Vatican Council was a watershed event which marked a departure from Catholic authentic tradition and ushered in a new religion. With us to discuss this crisis in the Church are 2 priests who reject the Second Vatican Council and its consequences and celebrate exclusively the traditional Latin Mass. Father Clarence Kelly is head of the Society of St. Pius V, an association of traditional Catholic priests who bring the sacraments, the traditional sacraments, to the Catholic faithful from New York to California. Father Kelly, in addition, is spiritual director of St. Joseph's Novitiate, a congregation of traditional nuns in Round Top, New York. Also with us is Father Donald Sanborn. Father Sanborn was formerly rector of St. Thomas Aquinas Seminary in Richfield, Connecticut. Currently, he is the pastor of St. Pius X Church in Warren, Michigan. In addition, he is chaplain of Catholic Men for Christ the King, an organization of Catholic laymen committed to the restoration of the kingship of Christ in society. Father Kelly, welcome to What Catholics Believe.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Julius.
Father Kelly, you sound like you're from New York, perhaps even Brooklyn.
I haven't been accused of that for many, many years, but I plead guilty.
Okay. Father Sanborn, welcome to What Catholics Believe.
Thank you, Julius.
You don't sound like you're from Brooklyn.
No, I'm not. Never would be. I'm from Queens.
Reverend Fathers, many don't see why you're so upset about Vatican II. They seem to believe that the Second Vatican Council was simply an application of traditional Catholic principles to the problems faced by man, the moral problems, in the latter half of the 20th century. Others would even go so far to say that the Second Vatican Council brought the Church in tune with the modern age. What's wrong with that?
Well, of course, the justification for the introduction of changes into the Church was precisely that we have to make religion relevant to the scientific age and to modern man, and therefore we should purge from the trappings of the Church those things which constitute an obstacle rather than an invitation to people to become Catholic, and therefore let's update the Church. That is the cloak or the camouflage, so to speak, that was used in order to justify what is not the making relevant traditional Catholic beliefs and practices, but rather the wholesale and substantial alteration of things which are essential to the Catholic faith. So in other words, the Second Vatican Council was not the reform of external and non-substantial things, but the Second Vatican Council brought about the essential revision of Catholic faith, morals, and worship, so that the end product is irreconcilable with what they began with. In other words, it was the first step in the creation of a new religion. And that new religion is the religion that is found throughout the world today.
You know, there's a conservative publication, I believe it's called Restoration, and it's very critical of Archbishop Lefebvre. They say that, yes, Archbishop Lefebvre always attacks the Second Vatican Council, but when he is forced to produce something concrete, he seems to fall short. He's always yelling about, well, the religious liberty, this is a departure from tradition. But then they say, this is nothing new. Pope Leo XIII said man should not be forced to accept the Catholic faith against his will.
You first must understand, in speaking about Vatican II and the changing of the Church to fit the modern world, that the modern world is something which is opposed to the Catholic Church. If we could characterize modern civilization, we would have to say that its main emphasis is on the freedom of the individual. Now, the Church is not against freedom of individuals, but it does say that it is the one true Church of our Lord Jesus Christ. And it has always taught that doctrine and has always defended that doctrine. When the modern world comes along with the idea that we want to believe whatever we want and we should not be constrained by any organization to believe this or that, the Church cannot conform itself to such an idea. And that particular doctrine of the right to believe whatever you want, or liberty of conscience, whatever you want to call it, but the idea that you have a right to believe whatever you want is the key error of Vatican II. And this is found explicitly in the Declaration on Religious Freedom. It says in there that every man has a right to religious freedom, and that this religious freedom is understood to be the right to believe whatever your conscience tells you. That is an abandonment of Catholic teaching. As a matter of fact, this very document asserted, almost word for word, a doctrine that was condemned by the apostolic authority of Pius IX 100 years earlier.
In other words, what you're saying is that man does not, or rather what the Church is saying, is that man does not have a right to believe whatever he wants to believe.
No, he doesn't.
The reason he doesn't is, and most people would be confused about this, most people would say, what in heaven's name is that priest saying? Man doesn't have the right to follow his conscience and so forth. We're not denying that the human conscience is the proximate norm of morality. What we're saying is this. We're saying that we are creatures of God, that God is the author of everything and owns it, as it were, that he sent his only begotten Son into the world to save us, and that the Son of God has a right to determine how we will be saved. And the truth is not determined by what we happen to have as opinions. The truth is something which is objective. And the Son of God comes to the earth, excuse me, the Son of God comes to the earth, and he reveals the truth. And he says, this is the truth. And if you abide by this truth, you will be free and you will save your souls. If you reject this truth, you will do it at peril of your eternal salvation. And the error that Father Sanborn is talking about is the notion that a person cannot be compelled under pain of even eternal punishment to believe certain things. That's the point. It's not a question of the toleration by society of various views and opinions. It's a question of, do we have a right to say to God, I reject the truth? If you assert that you have a right to believe anything you want, then God cannot punish a person for disbelief. And that attacks the gospel of Christ. Because our Lord said, go into the whole world and preach the gospel to every creature. He that believes shall be saved. He that does not shall be condemned. Now, the underlying truth there is that they do not have a right to reject the truth. They are duty-bound under pain of serious sin to accept the truth when the truth is preached to them. And they are duty-bound also to pursue the truth. That's the point. And the trend of the modern world that Father Sanborn is talking about is a trend which says, well, the truth doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter what you believe because religion really is not important.
Mm-hmm. So then if I'm to understand correctly, the constraints you are speaking of are moral constraints, not necessarily physical constraints. In other words...
Well, the Church would always defend the obligation of the Church to propose itself as the one true faith, and the obligation not only of individuals, but also of societies to recognize it as the one true faith. This has been the constant teaching of the Catholic Church. And although it recognizes in countries that are of many different religions that there must be religious toleration, nonetheless, it sees as pertaining to the royalty of our Lord Jesus Christ that all men, as individuals, and all societies have the obligation of recognizing Him as the one true God and King of the universe, and being in the religion that He founded. So the Church defends the fact and proclaims the fact that you are not free to, before God, to choose simply whatever religion you want or which pleases you, but you have the obligation of seeking out and adhering to the one true religion. Now, in that document, it says this one true religion subsists in the Catholic Church.
All right.
Which again brings us back to the key error of Vatican II, that they failed to identify the one true religion with the Catholic Church. They said rather it subsists in. And in the context of the document and in the discussions and in the context of the effects of Vatican II, the ideas that came out of it, it is clear that what they mean, and you can also cite this from other documents, it is clear that what they mean is that the true religion is found in the Catholic Church, implying also that it is found in other churches.
Well, isn't it true that other religions also have elements of the truth in them?
If they have elements of the truth, and some do, it is derived either from revelation, which is confided to the Catholic Church, or there are some natural truths that even pagans and philosophers arrived at. That's the only source of the truth, either truth that proceeds from reason or truth that proceeds from revelation. But they do not have proper to themselves anything that they have invented which is true.
The point, though, is what is the significance of this? Why are we making a major issue out of something like this? And the reason we're making a major issue out of it is for this. The eternal Son of God became a man born of the Blessed Virgin Mary. He died on the cross and rose from the dead. He established a church. He gave to that church authority to teach and to guide and to rule. And he gave to the church the means by which men would save their souls. That is to say, that they would move from this earth to heaven when they died. It is the duty of the church, it is the mission of the church to bring souls into her fold in order that those souls may be saved. And it is a betrayal of Christ. It is an attack upon the teaching of the popes when some Catholic comes out and says that one religion is as good as another, or that you don't have to be a Catholic. That is an attack on the gospel of Jesus Christ. There is only one church established by Him, and that church is the Catholic Church. And it is the duty of the hierarchy to preach that to the world. And when the bishops do not do that, when the bishop, for example, of this diocese refuses to do that, that bishop is a traitor. He is betraying the Son of God. And he is also betraying people. And he is not practicing charity. To pretend to people that there is no truth, or to pretend to people that it doesn't matter what you believe, or what religion you belong to, that is not charity. That is a poisonous type of charity which will cause those people to lose their souls. And that's why we are upset about it.
We're discussing the second. Say something before.
Yes, to further show the context of the error of Vatican II. In the Decree on Ecumenism, it says that our Lord Jesus Christ has not refrained from using other religions as a source of sanctification of men.
What's
That's a
wrong
heresy.
with
That other religions which may deny His divinity, which may deny His presence in the Holy Eucharist, which may deny many things that are contained explicitly in Revelation, that these are vehicles of the sanctification of men. That's a blasphemy.
But Father Sanborn, didn't even the Magi come to worship the Redeemer? They weren't Catholics.
It says in the Gospel, they proceeded toward Him and they adored Him. They came to him and they knelt down before him. There was no changing of Christ to them. Christ was not in any way altered to please them. They came to him and adored him.
Father, when you said this is heresy, that means it has to contradict something which was defined. Where was this defined?
In the Fourth Council of the Lateran, it said that there is no salvation outside the Catholic Church, meaning there are no means of salvation outside the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is the sole proprietor of the means of salvation to men.
Does that mean that someone who is not officially a member of the Catholic Church cannot be saved?
It means that in order to get to heaven, you must be a member of the Catholic Church. Now, it is possible to be a member of the Catholic Church by desire. In other words, if a person is in ignorance through no fault of his own, he doesn't realize or understand that the Catholic Church is the true church, and he loves God above all things and has perfect contrition for his sins, and is baptized, let's say, that surely a person like that would not be lost. But they would not be lost because of the fact that they would be joined to the church by desire, and even by implicit desire.
So what that means is that if someone is not officially a member of the Catholic Church, he can be, so to speak, unofficially a member of the Catholic Church, and he's saved not because he is not in the Catholic Church, but in spite of that fact.
That's right.
The distinction to be made is the body of the Church and the soul of the Church, that it is possible to be saved if you belong by implicit desire to the soul of the Catholic Church.
And I believe the historical example is the 40 Holy Martyrs, where in the early centuries of church history, these men were not yet Catholics, but they suffered martyrdom for Christ. They had a horrible death, and they were honored by the church as martyrs.
Yes, and even St. Ambrose spoke about the probable salvation of an emperor who died without baptism, but with the desire for baptism.
What do we see?
That, by the way, has been the constant teaching of the Church. You can find it in St. Augustine, and you can find it in the words of Pope Pius IX, that a person, for example, can be baptized even by desire.
What kind of examples do you see that this is an actual policy now of the post-Vatican II Church to promulgate and promote these ideas?
All you have to do is go into any church, go into virtually any church in any diocese in the United States and talk to the priests, and you will find that there is a lack of zeal for the truth. And if you ask them, is it necessary to become a Catholic? Do you have an obligation, a moral obligation, to pursue the truth and to embrace the truth of the Catholic faith? They will generally say, well, it doesn't really matter that there's one huge Christian religion, and the Catholic Church is just a part of this big Christian religion. And again, what that is a rejection of the obligation to preach the gospel. They should be preaching to the world, here is the truth of Christ, to make it available to souls, instead of pretending to people that it doesn't matter what you believe.
Father Jim.
You also see on a more official level, John Paul II himself praising Martin Luther, taking part in Lutheran worship, taking part in Jewish worship, even Hindu worship and Spiritist worship in Africa. He told a number of Baptists, a group of Baptist youth in Australia, he said, I am in communion with you. And this underlines the whole idea that there is one big religion, and the differences between the individual religions are merely accidental. That it's all the same, basically. It doesn't matter. And this is on the highest level of the church, we're seeing this.
But Father Sanborn, didn't St. Francis de Sales himself say that you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar? Couldn't it be that perhaps John Paul II thinks that, well, in the past we had this very hard line and we just drove people away? Now perhaps it's time to take a more conciliatory approach and bring our separated brothers closer to us.
There's an essential difference between compromising your faith on the one hand and on trying to be conciliatory and diplomatic to those who are outside the Catholic faith. he and those who share this opinion are compromising the faith when they take part in non-Catholic worship. That's considered a mortal sin to do that. And it's an implicit abandonment of the Catholic faith when you do that. To try to draw someone by not speaking harshly to them or by being diplomatic with them is an entirely different thing. And saints like St. Francis de Sales was responsible for many hundreds of thousands of conversions that way.
There's a difference between drawing people by honey and putting cyanide into the honey.
Well, Father Kelly and Father Sanborn, a third area which seems to be the most controversial of Vatican II is how Vatican Council perceived the Church within modern society. And I believe this is a document Archbishop Lefebvre himself has referred to many times, and I believe he did not sign it, along with many other bishops, called The Church in the Modern World. What is the situation with that document? What does it imply?
It implies essentially the abandonment of the royalty of our Lord Jesus Christ in the world by saying that implicitly that the Church no longer has the right to impose itself as the one true faith, and that societies no longer have the necessity of recognizing our Lord Jesus Christ as the true God and His Church as the true faith. That is the gist of that document.
There's a book, I believe it was called The Year of Three Popes by a gentleman named Hebblethwaite. And I believe there was a quotation there which said that while he was the Bishop of Krakow, Bishop Wojtyła, who subsequently became Pope John Paul II, said that, according to this man, that it is not the duty of the Church to teach others, words to that effect. Now, is this actually true? Was this said? And what is the significance of this remark?
Well, I don't know if he actually said it. It is within the realm of possibility, but that is precisely the duty of the Church. Mm-hmm. Go into the whole world and preach the gospel, were the words of our Lord. And that very notion that it is somehow arrogant or prideful for the Church to set itself up as the teacher over all men is a denial of the mission which was given to the Church by Christ, to teach the truth.
Many would say that the Second Vatican Council gave man much more dignity, in that previously he was told what to do, what to believe, and he really had not much say in the matter. Whereas now, a freedom of inquiry is encouraged, man is more responsible for his own actions, and they view the Vatican Second Council as taking us from a subhuman condition of intellectual irresponsibility to a condition of maturity where we are now responsible for your actions.
Well, let us say, for example, there was a hospital, and it was a very good hospital run in a very professional way with excellent doctors who were superbly trained, and they were very, very skilled. And the director of the hospital has changed, and another director comes in, and he says, I have determined that the way we did things in the past were too rigid. Henceforth, we will leave it up to you to determine what procedures you will use or you will not use, what drugs you will or will not prescribe, whether they are acceptable drugs or non acceptable drugs, because we believe in freedom of conscience. And we believe that doctors, especially doctors who have all of this education, should be able to run things the way they want to run. What would happen? You would have chaos. You would not have liberty. You would have the destruction of true liberty, because you would then have doctors doing, as it were, their own thing. And very few people would go to that hospital if they were seriously ill. That is, in effect, what has happened in the Church. In other words, under the guise of being mature, under the guise of recognizing the individuality, let's say, they have done something like that. They have abandoned proved procedures, as it were, with regard to what we believe and what we do, and obviously the result is before us. There is universal chaos. There is widespread destruction. Catholics no longer believe the same way they used to believe. They are not faithful in the reception of the sacraments. There is the disintegration of Catholic institutions, of seminaries, of Catholic colleges. It is clear that what has been introduced is not a recognition of the dignity of man, but under the guise of that, this poison that has infected virtually every institution in the church.
So it is not unlike the original temptation to Adam and Eve by the devil himself, who said, if you eat of this fruit, you shall know all things.
That's a good analogy.
Reverend Fathers, we've run out of time. Thank you.